we are looking at Megillat Esther, and we are looking at it, as I said, in a semi-textual way to look and try to understand it, not with every commentary out there. And we wouldn't probably get past chapter 1 if we did that, but at least have some of the concept of Megillat Esther. I do not think I'm going to read every pasuk, but I guess I'll read the first one. It was in the days of Achashverosh. Who Achashverosh? This is Achashverosh, Hamelech Mehodu Vad Kush, who ruled from Hodu to Kush. Sheva ve'Esra Me'ah Medina, 127 provinces, because it was really all one country, the country of Persia. Definitely, though this might seem strange to be learning about Megillat Esther in Iyar, but it actually seems very relevant because I've been thinking about the Megillah since the war started. Because we're living Megillat Esther. We're living this concept of eradicating the evil of Persia. So from that perspective, it's very, very, very timely. Okay, so who is Achashverosh? Achashverosh succeeded Cyrus, as the ruler of the Persian Empire toward the end of the 70-year exile of Jews, that of course originally was the Babylonian exile, Galus Bavel, and Jeremiah, the prophet, had said very clearly, God's going to destroy this temple. God's going to destroy this temple. And the Jews didn't believe him. He knew it's coming from Bavel, from that kingdom in the north. And the Jews didn't believe him. Why did they believe him? They didn't believe him because it was unfathomable to them that Hashem would ever destroy the Beis HaMikdash. Why was that unfathomable? Because there can't be Judaism without a temple. God destroying the temple? He's putting us in exile? Done with Judaism. That doesn't make any sense. That's no Jewish religion that we know of. So obviously it's not going to happen. Yirmiyah is trying to scare us. Yes, just to do tshuva, great idea. Though they were quite holy in many areas, but obviously they needed to improve. And I'm sure some did, and many did not. And there was this complacency of, he's never going to do it. God can't do it. He would destroy Judaism if he destroyed the temple and exiled us. And guess what? Hashem destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, and he put us in exile. And there's still Judaism. It's interesting. And I think with Jews from that time, if they were looking down on me, they even know I'm Jewish. It's very interesting because on one level, Judaism is unchanging. And on the other level, a Judaism without a temple for over 1900 years. A Judaism with the majority of the Jews not in Israel for over 1900 years is a very different Judaism that looked like in the temple, but it's still Judaism. So this same Uriah, who prophesied that God's going to destroy the temple, God's going to exile the Jews, this nation from the north is going to come and take over, which is exactly what they did, also said, and it will last for 70 years. So everybody knew that. Everybody knew there's going to be destruction, and it's going to last for 70 years, the exile. And that's why not only did the Jews know and believe this, but all the nations of the world knew and believed this. They all believed in Yirmiyah's prophecy. And however idolatrous they were believers. Nowadays people aren't idolatrous, they're just not believers. Then the world's a world of believers. They believed in God. They believed in the prophecy. They might have believed in idols also, but they believed in God, no question. He's the head honcho. And Yirmiyah said the temple's going to be destroyed by Babylonia, and that's exactly what happened. Jews were exiled, exactly what happened, which means we have a bit of scary, unpleasant news. This wonderful state of the temple destroyed and the Jews in exile is only going to last 70 years. And that's why it says that all the nations of the world, all the kings that were exiling the Jews, they kept counting those 70 years. Is it really going to happen? Is God going to really bring the Jews back? But there's a little non-clarity in Yirmiyah's prophecy. 70 years from when? Belshazzar, very famously, Belshazzar, who was actually the father-in-law of Achashverosh, the father of Vashti, a horrifically evil person, he counted 70 years also. And he's like, great, the Jews are still here. And he made this massive party. And that's where, of course, we have the famous term, the handwriting on the wall. Because this is where there was handwriting on the wall that says, you're going to be destroyed. And his kingdom was destroyed that night. And Achashverosh also counted 70 years. He's like, my father-in-law, what did he know? Father-in-laws know nothing, right? So his counting of 70 years, of course, he counted from the wrong point. It really wasn't so simple what point you start with. But Achashverosh, he's going to count properly. And he also counted 70 years. And guess what? The 70 years are over. And the Jews are still in exile. This is an awesome reason to celebrate. So the Megillah begins with the party, a feast that lasted 6 months. For 6 months, they're drinking. What are they celebrating? What's the party over? 70 years are over and the Jews are still here. Their God's not taking them out. We're really happy. We're really excited. Maybe it's a little hard for us to understand this because you so believe in God and you so believe in the prophecy. Don't you want to serve him? Don't you want to respect the Jews who are God's servants? Like, it didn't cross that way. We believe in God. He's very powerful. And we really hate the Jews. And really, it's not like we love God either. We just accept his power, but we don't want to be under his yoke. So that's the beginning of the whole story when we know of this massive party, this drinking feast, like really to get drunk for all of these months. It was because we're so excited. The Jews are stuck in exile. This is, as we're saying, the beginning of the Megillah. And therefore, when we have, this is Achashverosh, he is Achashverosh, who is ruling from Hodu to Cush, the entire known world, beginning this massive party, because he's thinking the Jews are stuck. So that's on the physical plane. On the mystical plane, Achashverosh alludes to God. Achashverosh, the Midrash says, is an acronym for Achris Veracious Shalom, which means all beginnings, well, literally all ends and beginnings are his. Why do we need this allusion to God as Achashverosh? And why would Achashverosh be an allusion to God? We need it for the reason that I think we all know that God's name is in the Megillah exactly 0 times, that God's name is never mentioned, which is very deliberate design and very symbolic of the entire theme of the Megillah. Megillah is Giloi, the revelation of Esther, Hester, hidden. Megillat Esther, Giloi Hester, the revelation of that which is concealed. Megillat Esther, the theme is all about how the hidden we uncover. So we're uncovering it. It's hidden. So God's name would be a very big revelation. No, God's fingerprints are everywhere, but you have to find him because you're not going to see him otherwise because he's completely concealed. We don't even mention his name once, but he's in every detail. And of course, I think that's why we so relate to the story of Purim, because it's like the story of our lives. Meaning Hanukkah is like, whoa, the oil burned for 7 days. Everything in Megillat Esther is completely natural. There's nothing miraculous, but the whole story is completely miraculous. And as we keep discussing, it's a story that took place over 9 years and we read it in 40 minutes and all the dots line up. But if you lived through those 9 years, you wouldn't see it that way, just like what we're going through now. So for all of these reasons, same idea of like why the custom is to dress up in costume, because God is in disguise. Why the custom is to have the Hamantash, not named after Haman. That's an aberration of the word. The idea is a tash, Hamantash, a pocket of mun, of poppy seeds. Some say because Esther survived in the palace off seeds. But muntash, a pocket of seeds, like it's concealed. You see on the top just some dough, not very sweet or appealing, but underneath there's the tash, there's the poppy seed, something very, very sweet. Again, the same theme. So for that reason, God's name isn't in the Megillah, but he has to be alluded to. And he's alluded to by Achashverosh. So we could say, well, he's alluded to by Achashverosh because like it works in a word. Achashverosh, Acharis, Veracious, Shalom. Even if you don't exactly know the Hebrew, you hear how it sounds right. They could have found another way to allude to God's name. Really, from a spiritual perspective, Achashverosh is the most fitting character in the story to be an allusion to God because he's the powerful king of the entire world. God is the king of all kings. And every human king on a certain level is an expression of God's kingship. Does that make Achashverosh a good guy? No, Achashverosh was a horrible guy. The sages say he hated us more than Haman. The typical Purim play, spiel, performance make Achashverosh like some, nice guy, a little slow, a little foolish, a little drunk. He hated us worse than Haman. And he was very, very, very sly, very clever because he managed to survive the story and Haman got hanged. But he represents God's energy. Just like in Chumash, we have Paro, Pharaoh of Egypt, horrible evil, one of those horrifically evil villains in all of scriptures, in all of Tanakh. But his spiritual roots, Kabbalistically are called Ispariu V'Skali Mine Kol Nahirin. Paro Ispariu, the initial source of revelation of all lights, the first revelation of God's essence and being. The first revelation of God's essence and being. Paro was so evil. Yes, he was. Doesn't take it away. It's an enormous force of God energy, which in this world became an enormous force of evil. But the power, the enormity of that force is coming from a very high spiritual source. So Ahasuerus was horrifically wicked, as bad a bad guy as Haman, but coming from a very, very, very high source, as expressed by the fact that he was literally king of the entire known world, which is why Purim is such a significant story. It's not the only time Jews faced annihilation. I mean, we know that. If you don't know that, you learn like a tiniest drop of Jewish history and you'll learn it very fast. But this time was different because it was the entire world. If they're expelling us in one country, we're going to go to the next country. You know, if it's in Europe where we're going to North Africa, we'll always find another haven. But here it was the entire world. And not only was it the entire world, it was the entire world on one day. So like there's no escape, but there's God. And that's the story of Purim. Okay? So it's Ahasuerus, symbolically representing God, and on the physical plane, this horrific world leader who ruled from Hodu to Kush. In the Talmud, there's a big debate on where's Hodu and where's Kush. And some say the countries are at the opposite ends of the world. Rav says that. So when we say Ahasuerus ruled from Hodu to Kush, we're saying he ruled the entire known world. Shmuel, it's usually Rav versus Shmuel in the Gemara, says no, actually Hodu and Kush were next to each other. And we're saying he ruled the entire world by talking about two countries that are next to each other, meaning as easy as it is to rule these two countries that are next to each other, that's how Ahasuerus ruled the whole world. Usually they're translated as from Hodu to Kush, from India to Kush, Ethiopia. Usually Hodu is a reference to India and Kush is a reference to Ethiopia. But again, from the Gemara, it's not really clear if it was India to Ethiopia, which might scope the entire known world, or if it was two other countries that were right next to each other, like India and Pakistan. All right. So we have this feast. When do we have this feast? So we started off, again, the Megillah is introducing us to the character, this very pivotal character of Ahasuerus, who is having this enormous, enormous, enormous feast. For whom? For all the nobles, for the most important people of the entire world, showing off all of his glory, showing off all of his wealth for 180 days. If we can envision 6 months, right? 6 times 30, 180. This is a 6-month drunken fest where we do nothing but drink and party and eat and celebrate the downfall of the Jews. At the end of those 180 days of drinking, Ahasuerus has seemingly popped into his head, his very drunken head, right? A very novel idea. What's his novel idea? His novel idea is, you know what? We would call it, let's be democratic. Until now, we've been drinking for 180 days, but to enjoy. It's just been the nobles, the aristocrats, the important people of the world. I want every common man to participate in this joy. So for 1 week, we've been partying for 180 days, for 6 months. For 7 days, it's a different type of party. It's a party for every commoner in Shushan, even the Jews. Of course, as we know, this had nothing to do with reality. The proclamation is like, I'm, going to love every man, every common man. It's to the Jews. Of course, the reality is that this was a plot, as I think we all know, and I'm going to say it quickly, but of course, it's very important if we forget it, devised by Haman and Ahasuerus to ensure that those 70 years should never actually lead to the Jews returning back to Israel and the building of the temple. Meaning, as I explained, 6 months prior, Ahasuerus is like, great, 70 years over, Jews still here, let's celebrate. Partying for 6 months, but his brain is still ticking. And he's like, wait a minute. What if God does return them? What if maybe God's not so happy with them now, but then maybe something's going to happen. And then he's going to say, yeah, you come back home. Let's build a temple. I don't want that to ever happen. So what do? Again, all these people, it's sort of hard for us to envision this because our world of the evil villains is a little different, but they were big believers. So to speak, they're very religious. I mean, Hamas and Hezbollah are also very religious, if you want to use that term. They're believers in evil, but they're believers. So Ahasuerus was a believer. He believed in God's power. How could you believe in God and, so to speak, hate him? Hard for us to fathom. Hard for us to fathom. But that's actually the original definition of a kofer, right? As we call it, an apostate. Let me just finish. I'll take your question. Is someone who yada es ribono umiskave limrod bo, right? The first apostate, kofer, was Nimrod. And it says about Nimrod, he knew God and intended to rebel against him, which is sort of strange. We would think rebels are people that don't know God. No, he knows God. And somehow in his mind, he's fighting God. Ahasuerus totally believed in a God, believed in his power, believed in the prophecy, and was fighting him and fighting. You hate God, you hate the Jews. You hate the Jews, you hate God. Believe? I don't believe is the right word, but I don't know what other word to use to say totally recognized, acknowledged, and obviously fighting him and fighting the Jews. And therefore he made this party because the goal of the party was to so mess up the Jews with sin that God would never forgive them and they'd be stuck. And the actual truth is, and I'm going to take Nina's question, but the truth is that our sages say, why did the Jews deserve annihilation? Because they ate from the party. So Ahasuerus' plan was not so foolish. Dina.
Maybe I missed this, but was it like part of an organized religion that they were, or they were just, like you're saying, they were just haters of God and the Jews, or was it like part of their religion, like let's say Hezbollah, or like they believe that this is what God wants them to do?
It's an interesting question. The Gemara says, Halacha hi biyadenu she'esav sonei Yaakov. I think I might have just mangled the quote, so I got maybe some of the words right. But what it means is this is a fact. Esav hates Jacob. That's the facts. It could, in some cultures and eras, be expressed as a religion. It could, in some cultures and eras, be expressed as science. It could, in some cultures and eras, be expressed as politics, philosophy, sociology. In any situation, it's going to come out within what's socially acceptable, but it's all the same hatred. It's sort of like, I don't remember who said this, but I don't remember who pointed this out, that it's so interesting because whatever a country hates, that's what they call the Jews. Meaning at the same time, like pre-World War II, in Russia, the Jews are hated because they're the bourgeois, they're the affluent. And at that same time, in Germany, the Jews are hated because they're called the communists. And in one country, the Jews are hated because they're the poor ones. They're sucking our blood and they're so poor. At the same time, in other places, the Jews are hated because they're the rich ones. They're grabbing everything and they're the rich ones. It's however you're going to acceptably, frame your hatred to make it acceptable, that's what you're going to call the Jews. So in the times of Ahasuerus, no, the religion, there was no organized religion at that time. Everyone was idol worshippers. And we don't really see, and it's an interesting question you're asking, we don't really see any reference in the Megillah to a religious overlay to Ahasuerus or Haman. Not to either of them. And we do see that in other situations.
Yeah, we see with the Romans, the Spanish, was like a lot of different situations. There was a religious,
right?
Like that was it. It was their religion. Even like science, I see in some ways, but it was like religion. And so when Mashiach comes, is that not going to be fact anymore?
When Mashiach comes, as Ruach HaTomah min haaretz, God says, I will remove the spirit of impurity from the world. And therefore all of this hatred will be gone because every single human being will not have any evil in him. So the evil, which is the source of, in other words, as I said before, hating Jews is an expression of hating God. Those that hate God hate the Jews.
Isn't hating in general? Hating anything?
Yeah, well, no, there's a concept to hate evil. We're supposed to hate evil. Hating evil is appropriate. Might not sound nice, but we're supposed to hate evil. But in general, those that hate God hate the Jews. Those that hate the Jews hate God. Sometimes it's expressed as religion if that's the society. But in Soviet Russia, there was enormous persecution of the Jews, and it wasn't expressed as religion because religion is outlawed. So they found other reasons to hate the Jews. It wasn't under religion. Nowadays, there's this term called anti-Semitism, right? What does anti-Semitism do? It whitewashes it. It's not religion. It's not because Jews murdered JC. It's racial, right? The Germans were anti-Semites. It was racial. We're professors. We're scientists. This is just genetics. We're destroying the Jews for genetic reasons, right? They're polluting the race. We're the Aryans. We're the master race. The Jews, we don't want that pollutant just harming the Aryan race. So we just have to wipe them off the face of the earth. Nowadays, we don't call it anti-Semitism. That's not politically acceptable. So we found a new term. We call it anti-Zionism. We're not anti-Semites. We're not religious at all. We were not into any, Catholic, fundamentalists, the Jews, JC. Nah, we're not racial. Jews are wonderful people. We're just anti-Zionist. And because it's an apartheid state and, nothing to do with anything. It's just because of, how they mistreat the indigenous population, right? The real Palestinians, the real population. So that's how it works. But it's so in the times of Megillat Esther, they didn't create a religious overlay. They didn't create a racial overlay. They didn't create a political overlay. They were very simple. We hate the Jews. We hate the Jews and we want to get rid of them. They just said it exactly as it is.
It's Amalek. And isn't Amalek just a hatred of Jews, period, not
Exactly.
based on
Exactly.
right.
That is Amalek. And that, of course, we know Haman was a direct descendant of Amalek.
Amalek, right.
I never saw anywhere written that Ahasuerus was a direct descendant of Amalek, but seemingly he was because we're told that anyone who hates the Jews has Amaleki blood in them like that. But again, the sages are saying that it's sort of many people have this hatred towards the Jews. Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because the Gemara says Esav Sona Yaakov, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe said that Esav has been refined. So the enormous, unrelenting hatred that we experience from Esav, from the Roman Empire, from the Roman world, from Western civilization, the Rebbe says now has been refined, which of course makes sense as we see that now the core hatred is coming from the Islamic world. So it's sort of shifted because throughout the history, let's say from the destruction of the temple until recent times, the Islamic world was a much safer place for the Jews than the Western European Christian Catholic world. When the Jews in Christian Catholic Europe were suffering enormously, the Jews in the Islamic countries had it much, much, much better. Now, I'm not saying they had it good. And if you learn the history, they also had persecution. It's funny because in America, we don't learn so much about the Taimani, and we don't learn so much of that Sephardic history. But my daughter's learning in high school in Israel, and they do. So being her teacher last year, studying with her for every test, which Baruch Hashem, I don't have to do this year. She's figured it out. I learned a lot of Taimani history. And there was a lot of persecution, but not to the degree that the Jews in Christian Europe suffered. So the main hatred came from Christian Europe. The Islams did not make it easy for us. They oppressed us and suppressed us. But still, the Jews were able to flourish much, much more. And it was much, much safer than under the Christian Europe. But now, as I'm saying, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that ace of energy has been refined, and the Islamic world has now become the main source of this hatred. So Ahasuerus and Haman have this plot. We don't want the Jews going back. We got to get them to sin. How are we going to get them to sin? We're going to get them to the party. Obviously, their God doesn't want. Obviously, their God doesn't let. And there were myriads of layers of prohibitions here. First of all, there's a prohibition in general of going to a party with non-Jews, or going to a party that's not kosher, even if you yourself have kosher food. Meaning this could apply today. If you're invited to a party and the food's not kosher, even if you're not going to be eating the food, or even if they're going to get you a kosher plate, it's a very big halachic question. Are you allowed to go to such a party? So right off, there's the prohibition of going to such a party. In addition, of course, though, Achashverosh said, oh, again, I'm so loving and beneficent and democratic here. Don't worry, there'll be some kosher food for you. Don't worry, there'll be some kosher wine. But obviously the assumption was, you're relaxing. It looks better than what's on your plate, Imagine the airline meals versus the party. Whatever. Mordechai, who was the spiritual leader of the Jews at that time, we call it the Rebbe, so to speak, the spiritual leader of the Jews, the Moshe of that time, he said, don't go. Don't go. Don't go. You're not allowed to go. God doesn't let. You're not allowed to go to the party. You're not allowed to mingle and drink with non-Jews. You're not allowed to end up drinking their food, eating their wine. And this whole party is sacrilegious. This whole party is celebrating the destruction of the temple. And of course, as we know, it says Achashverosh went to the party with the clothing of the high priest and with the vessels of the temple were on display, because this is what the whole party was about. You can't go. And unfortunately, most of the Jews didn't listen to him. I'm sure some did, but most of the Jews didn't. And they were like, Mordechai, you don't get it. This isn't religious. This is political. Achashverosh likes us. Could you imagine? We've been here for almost 70 years and a king is saying we're equal citizens. This is huge. We can't blow this. Don't worry, we won't eat or drink anything not kosher. And Mordechai said, even if you don't eat anything kosher, you're not allowed to go. It's forbidden according to Jewish law. And most didn't listen to him. So some Jews messed up because they went to the party. Of course, some Jews messed up because they also ate the not kosher food and drank the not kosher wine. But you didn't have to eat the not kosher food and drink the not kosher wine to mess up. You're not allowed to go to such a party. And especially they're messing up because they are directly not listening to the leader of the generation who's telling them, don't go. And especially when they see Achashverosh there in the begadim of the Kohen Gadol, dressed as the high priest, with the vessels of the temple on the table, and they stay, that's even more. There was level upon level upon level of what they did wrong. But still, of course, the question is the Talmud's bottom line. That's why they deserve Haman's decree of annihilation, because they went to the party. They ate the party. Okay, they ate. And they drank, and it wasn't kosher, and it was wrong, and they went against Mordechai, and they went against God, and they weren't supposed to go to the party, and they weren't for sure not allowed to eat or drink the not kosher. And when they saw the clothing of the high priest and they didn't run out, of course, they were wrong. But for this, they deserve annihilation? And the Lubavitch Rebbe explains that the point here is they were basically saying, when Mordechai says, don't go, danger, 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 don't go. And they're like, we gotta go. Achashverosh is inviting us. It'd be so rude to say no. What they were doing was basically saying, we trust Achashverosh. We want to be in his good books. If he likes us, that's good. It's going to help us. And Mordechai was saying, you want to be in God's good books. But they went to the party. They chose Achashverosh's over God's. And God said, oh, really? You think if Achashverosh likes you, you're safe? It's not God's protection that's been keeping you all these years? No problem. Be under Achashverosh. So it's not like Hashem said, oh, I'm going to punish you. And the punishment is you're going to get annihilated. Hashem's saying, I'm giving you exactly what you want. You think Achashverosh's protection is going to save you? Fine. I'll remove my divine protection. Let's see what happens. And what happened, of course, was the decree of Haman. And that is the very beginning of the Megillah. We got